For the Allied tankers and infantrymen battling the German armored elites in North Africa and Europe, the M4 Sherman became an indispensable asset. It was cheap, reliable, and easy to build, a machine designed for war on a massive scale. Its sheer numbers gave the Allies the power to keep pushing forward, battle after battle. Yet, its shortcomings were equally apparent. Against the heavy German tanks, the Sherman was often outgunned and outmatched, leading to heavy losses in multiple campaigns. To survive, the Sherman had to evolve. New variants were born, faster, deadlier, and better suited for the brutal battles of the late war. From this vast family of Shermans, two versions rose above the rest, both admired by tank crews and remembered fondly by history enthusiasts: the British Sherman Firefly and the American M4A3E8 Easy8. Both carried powerful guns and earned legendary reputations on the battlefield. Today, we're putting them side by side to see which one truly changed the game and earned the title of the ultimate Sherman. When Allied forces faced the increasingly powerful German tanks in North Africa and Italy, it became clear that the standard Sherman was reaching its limits. The solution, however, came not from an entirely new design, but from two significant evolutions of the same foundation. The first was a British innovation, the Sherman Firefly, created out of necessity. As reports of tigers and panthers spread across the front, British engineers sought to give their dependable Shermans a harder punch. By fitting the formidable 17-pounder anti-tank gun into the narrow Sherman turret, they transformed the tank from a general-purpose vehicle into a dedicated tank killer. Although this modification demanded awkward compromises, the Firefly finally gave Allied crews the firepower to take on Germany's heaviest armor head-on. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, American military planners took a different approach. Instead of relying solely on heavier tank guns, they created a dedicated tank destroyer force to handle enemy armor, while some Shermans were upgraded with a longer 76mm gun to better take on German heavy tanks. The M4A3E8 Easy8 emerged from this evolution, a faster, smoother, and tougher Sherman designed for a more balanced fight. Introduced in late 1944, it featured improved horizontal volute suspension, wider tracks, and a high-velocity 76mm gun, offering a crucial blend of mobility and lethality. It wasn't a radical redesign, but it represented the Sherman perfected, a culmination of the lessons learned through years of combat. The most striking difference between the Firefly and the Easy8 lay in their guns, the very heart of what defined a tank's battlefield role. The British Sherman Firefly mounted the powerful Ordnance QF 17-pounder anti-tank gun, one of the most feared Allied weapons of the war. Firing an armor-piercing round at over 1,200 meters per second, it could penetrate the frontal armor of a Tiger I or Panther at typical combat ranges, something few Allied tanks could boast before 1944. This transformed the Firefly into one of the most feared Allied tanks of the war. German crews were ordered to target Fireflies first whenever spotted, easily identifiable by their long barrel. Its sheer muzzle velocity gave it devastating penetration, but this came at a price. The gun size forced engineers to modify the turret. The breach nearly filled the space inside, making reloading cramped and slow, while the radio had to be moved to a box welded onto the turret rear. Despite its cramped fighting compartment and slow reload, the Firefly gave British and Commonwealth forces a weapon that could finally go toe-to-toe with the best of the Wehrmacht. In contrast, the American Easy8 was armed with the 76mm M1A2 gun, a logical upgrade from the earlier 75mm version found on standard Shermans. While not as powerful as the 17-pounder, it offered a better balance of rate of fire, ammunition handling, and overall combat practicality. The Easy8's gun could fire a variety of shells, including the HVAP rounds, which, though rare in supply, allowed it to defeat even late-war German armor under favorable conditions. The 76mm gun offered faster reload times, better high-explosive shells for use against infantry and soft targets, and good overall accuracy. This made the Easy8 an effective all-rounder, not a tank killer like the Firefly, but a versatile battlefield performer that could engage infantry, bunkers, and most enemy armor with confidence. On paper, the Firefly clearly had the advantage in pure penetration, capable of piercing nearly 150 millimeters of armor at 500 meters. The Easy8, by comparison, struggled against the thick frontal armor of Panthers and Tigers unless using special ammunition or firing from the flank. Yet, the American gun was easier to aim, faster to operate, and more suited for mixed combat environments where enemy tanks were just one of many threats. When it came to protection, neither the Firefly nor the Easy8 could truly be called a heavy tank. Both were still Shermans at heart, medium tanks designed for mobility and production efficiency rather than sheer armor thickness. Yet, there were important distinctions in how each approached survivability. The Sherman Firefly, based on the older M4 or M4A4 hulls, retained the same 50 to 63 millimeters of frontal armor, sloped at 56 degrees for better deflection. However, the British didn't add much in the way of armor improvements. Their focus was purely on upgrading firepower. This meant the Firefly, despite its long and deadly gun, was still just as vulnerable as a standard Sherman. A single hit from a Panther or Tiger could easily destroy it. Its tall silhouette and the long 17-pounder barrel also made it stand out on the battlefield, drawing enemy attention. Crews often tried to camouflage the barrel, painting it with disruptive stripes to make it look shorter from a distance. The M4A3E8, on the other hand, benefited from later war American refinements. Its 47-degree sloped glacis gave improved ballistic protection over earlier flat-front Shermans, and welded hull construction reduced weak points. The armor thickness wasn't dramatically higher, roughly 63 millimeters at the front, but the improved slope and quality of the rolled homogeneous steel offered better resistance against enemy rounds. In addition, the wet stowage ammunition racks, introduced in mid-war Shermans, significantly reduced the risk of catastrophic fires, a notorious problem in early versions that earned the tank the grim nickname Ronson. Still, against the high-velocity German 75mm and 88mm guns, both tanks were outmatched in head-on duels. Survivability for Sherman crews depended more on tactics, coordination, and visibility. Where the Firefly and Easy8 truly began to diverge was in how they moved across the battlefield. The Sherman Firefly inherited the limitations of the earlier chassis it was based on, usually the M4 or M4A4. These variants were equipped with engines such as the Chrysler A57 Multibank, a complex but serviceable power plant that produced around 425 horsepower. However, the extra weight of the 17-pounder gun, its larger breech, and additional ammunition meant the Firefly was front-heavy and somewhat sluggish compared to standard Shermans. The long barrel also made maneuvering through tight terrain, like Normandy hedgerows or urban streets, a challenge. Crews had to be cautious when turning or cresting terrain to avoid striking the ground with the gun. Despite these drawbacks, the Firefly retained the Sherman's hallmark, reliability. It could still travel roughly 25 to 30 miles per hour on roads, and its suspension, though not ideal for cross-country performance, was rugged enough for long campaigns. The Easy8, meanwhile, was built from the ground up with improved mobility in mind. Introduced in late 1944, it featured the horizontal volute spring suspension HVSS system, a major leap over earlier Sherman's vertical suspension. This new system gave the tank a smoother ride, better stability at speed, and improved weight distribution across its wider 23-inch tracks, allowing better traction on soft ground and snow. Powered by the Ford GAA V8 engine, a 500 horsepower gasoline powerhouse, the Easy8 could reach up to 30 to 35 miles per hour on roads. More importantly, it handled rough terrain with far greater comfort and control. The ride was smoother, the tank was more responsive, and its suspension could handle the recoil of the 76mm gun without unsettling the aim. On the battlefield, this translated to real tactical flexibility. The Easy8 could quickly reposition, flank heavier enemy armor, or withdraw when needed, exactly the kind of mobility advantage American doctrine depended on. Both the Firefly and Easy8 were built on the same Sherman foundation, but how they were used and how their crews fought reflected two very different doctrines. For the British and Commonwealth tank crews, the Firefly was a long-awaited equalizer. Since 1942, British forces had struggled against German heavy tanks in North Africa and Europe, often outgunned and outarmored. The introduction of the Firefly in 1944 finally gave them a tank that could hit back effectively. However, that power came at a cost. The cramped turret and awkward ammunition layout made reloading difficult, particularly in the heat of battle. The long barrel also made concealment harder, and the heavy recoil of the 17-pounder could jolt the entire vehicle. Crews had to be well-trained to handle its quirks, and coordination within the tank was vital. Yet, when handled by experienced crews, the Firefly became a deadly ambush weapon. In Normandy, Fireflies often held back behind standard Shermans, waiting for German tanks to appear before delivering a well-aimed killing shot from long range. Many of the Allies' most famous tank kills in 1944-45, including several Tigers and Panthers, and even the destruction of Michael Wittmann's tank, were credited to Fireflies. In contrast, American tank crews operating the M4A3E8 approached combat differently. The U.S. Army's doctrine emphasized mobility, coordination, and massed firepower, rather than one-on-one tank duels. The Easy8 fit perfectly into this philosophy. With its improved suspension, smoother ride, and faster turret traverse, the Easy8 gave American crews better handling and control in fast-paced engagements. The five-man crew worked efficiently, thanks to a spacious turret layout and good visibility, allowing the commander to focus on leading rather than multitasking. By the war's end in 1945, both the Sherman Firefly and Easy8 had proven themselves on the battlefield, but their legacies took very different paths. The Firefly, despite its success, was very much a wartime solution, a brilliant improvisation born out of necessity. The British had taken an existing design and transformed it into one of the most effective tank killers of the late war. However, its design was already reaching its limits. The cramped turret, complex ammunition stowage, and logistical challenges of maintaining two separate ammunition types made it less practical in the long run. Once the war ended, the Firefly was quickly phased out of British service in favor of purpose-built post-war tanks like the Comet and Centurion, which carried similar or greater firepower in better-designed hulls. Still, the Firefly's impact cannot be understated. It restored Allied tank crews' confidence at a critical moment in 1944 and proved that ingenuity could overcome technical disadvantages. The Easy8, meanwhile, marked a significant step forward in American tank development. Its improved suspension, gun, and armor layout directly influenced the post-war M26 Pershing, and later the M46 and M48 Patton series. In fact, many Easy8s remained in frontline service well into the 1950s, seeing action in Korea, where they faced Soviet-supplied T-34-85s and held their own remarkably well. More importantly, the Easy8's blend of mobility, reliability, and ease of maintenance became a blueprint for future American tank design philosophy, emphasizing practical engineering and battlefield durability over complexity. The Firefly played a key role in turning the tide during the Battle of Normandy. British and Commonwealth forces faced more than 70% of Germany's armored strength, including most of the elite Waffen-SS Panzer units. Against that kind of firepower, the Firefly became a prized asset, the only British tank that could reliably take on Panthers and Tigers head-on. By the end of the war, more than 2,000 Fireflies and around 2,500 Easy-8s had seen action. Measured by numbers and longevity, the Easy-8 stood as the ultimate Sherman. Measured by sheer firepower and battlefield shock, the Firefly kept its crown. In the end, each was ultimate in its own way. Both variants symbolize what made the Sherman series legendary: versatility, reliability, and the ability to evolve under pressure. Whether through British ingenuity or American industrial might, they each represent a different side of the same story: how one humble tank design became one of the most iconic machines of World War II.